I am going to give you an overview. Just wait a second. Yes, I want to give you an overview today of the Humanitarian Standards Partnership. I will explain to you what this partnership is about. And we will make a focus, we will speak about the focus, we will focus on the application of standards in the Zaatari camp in Jordan. So what will be covered today, we will speak about the Humanitarian Standards Partnership, HSP. We will present each of the standards that is part of this partnership. I will present to you the results of a short research, a case study that was developed for the Zaatari camp, and we will discuss about the way forward. Really, the objective of the training is for you to get an introduction on the sphere standards and the partners standards, for you to get acquainted with them. And it will be a success if you, after this training, you see the connection with your work, you see the relevance with your work, and you see how you can use them and read them to be as guidance for your day-to-day work. So I will be presenting. My name is Shemina. I'm coordinating the Humanitarian Standards Partnership, and Hamza, who already introduced himself, who is a very active trainer on a broad range of humanitarian standards, specifically in the MENA region. So we will both be presenting to you today. So first, you must be wondering, what is the Humanitarian Standards Partnership? Most of you must be acquainted with SPHERE, and before I dig into that, I want to mention that please feel free to ask any questions during the presentation, after the presentation. We want to make it as interactive as possible, so please just let me know if you have any questions. About the Humanitarian Standards Partnership, you know, most of you know SPHERE. You know that SPHERE minimum standards are universal benchmarks focusing on key life-saving. Yeah.
Sorry, this is Hamza.
Is there a question?
I'm sorry, you can't complete. Just we have a voice issue.
Okay. So you know that SPHERE is focusing on life-saving areas: water supply, hygiene promotion, food security, shelter, non-food items, health action. All these areas, we will talk about it a bit later, a bit more in detail. We know that they are crucial, but they do not exhaust all the components of a humanitarian response to disaster and to conflict. Therefore, SPHERE has recognized a series of standards that you can see here, that are produced by other organizations and networks active in specific sectors as partners standards to its own handbook, and together they form the Humanitarian Standards Partnership. The aim of this partnership is to provide humanitarian professionals with a harmonized set of quality standards that are easy to use and easy to refer to. So it's really to support humanitarian actors to continuously strive for more quality and accountability in humanitarian response, accountability towards affected population. So all of these standards that you see here, that we are going to present in details afterwards, they truly reflect two core beliefs. The first one is that people affected by disaster or conflict have a right to live with dignity, and therefore they have a right to assistance. And second, related to these rights, all possible steps should be taken to alleviate human suffering arising out of a disaster or a conflict. So this is a belief, a core foundation shared by all of these standards, by SPHERE, naturally, SPHERE Handbook, also by CPMS, Child Protection Minimum Standards, also by INEE, which is the minimum standards for education, LEGS, Livestock Emergency Guidelines and Standards, by MERS, MERS is the minimum economic recovery standards, and MISMA, that you can see here, is the minimum standard for market analysis. Those are the current members of the Humanitarian Standards Partnership that we will present. So, the thing to remember is that all those partners, the Humanitarian Standard Partnership partners, standards, they share a rights-based approach, a universal rights-based approach, and they all, when you will read them, you will see that they really put people at the center of the response. That is their aim, to constantly remind that people benefiting from the assistance should be the driver of the response, should be at the center of every single action that is developed to protect them or to provide an assistance. So standards help to improve coordination and get everyone working from the same page. As I was telling you, the partner standards, they complement SPHERE. They cover additional key areas of humanitarian response. At the beginning, at the center of everything, there is the Humanitarian Charter, as you can see in this chart. The Humanitarian Charter, those are principles, rights and beliefs. It's based on international laws. It really represents the ethical and legal framework to humanitarian response. Then you have the protection principles. The protection principles set out how to protect people from violence, how to avoid causing harm, how to ensure access to impartial assistance, and assist with recovery from abuse. And the core standards on humanitarian standard on quality and accountability describe the elements of accountable, effective, and high-quality humanitarian action. Based on that, you will have the minimum technical standards, and these covered all together through the partnership all these areas: shelter and settlement, wash, health, food, security and nutrition, livestock, education, child protection, market analysis, economic recovery. So something they all have in common, and you must be wondering how the HSP standards are designed. Actually, they are coming out of the broad, vast consultation processes encompassing many actors. So many policymakers, practitioners sit together and exchange their best practices, their learning, they share evidence, they share all really their expertise, and they agree to set up these standards. So this is really something to remember, that these standards come out of really deep consultation processes. They really represent learning, best practices with cases, with case studies. When to use them? Actually, they are designed to be used at every stage of humanitarian response, meaning that they can be used at prevention, but also from preparedness to response to early recovery or prevention. Really, at every stage, they can be used, they can be useful, and we will see that a bit later. We can discuss about that a bit later again. And most of the time, humanitarians use them for proposal writing and throughout their program cycle to plan and cost humanitarian interventions, to monitor and evaluate quality and effectiveness, to train their staff and partners organizations, to enable advocacy on humanitarian needs, and support everyone in all sectors working in humanitarian action. So most of the time they are used for proposal development, for project design, and for coordinating efforts. And they also guide governments and policymakers in their duties towards those affected by humanitarian crisis. What's important also is that they are not necessarily geared for specific organizations. They are for all types of organizations. Whether you represent a small organization, a community-based organization, a large international organizations, you can use these standards. How to get hold of them? They are available as handbooks that you can order, but you can also read them on the partner's website as PDF, and you can have access to them on your mobile devices through the HSP app, the HSP application. I will talk a bit about that, the HSP app. This smartphone application is made for you, for everyone who needs standards, to have access, free access to all standards really at your fingertips. You have all standards in your pocket. It's easy. You will see when you will download it that you will see that it's easy to navigate. It doesn't take too much space in your phone, and you can access to all the standards I mentioned before, online, but also offline. This is important because the aim of this app is really to make standards accessible for everyone in very remote location, and for practitioners, for frontline workers, for beneficiaries who do not have sometimes quality or good access to internet. So it was important that they could have access to the standards also offline. You will see when you will download that you can make a personal use of the standards. That means that you can bookmark one section, you can share it with someone, you can share it on social media like Facebook or Twitter. You can also make notes. There is a high contrast version for people who have difficulty to see, who have visual impairment. You can make research for specific terms across several standards. You can also visualize the interactive tools that are already included in the standards. And you will see that each of the standards are cross-referenced. So for instance, if you want to download the Sphere Handbook and you see that there is a reference to the Child Protection Minimum Standard, you will click on the link and it will directly conduct you to the Child Protection Minimum Standards. So it's easier for you to navigate between standards. You will also receive notification of training, of articles, of news, of videos, of material, of all resources, case studies developed by the standards. And there is also a feedback form in case you want to give feedback on the standards on the app. It has been launched end of last year, in September last year. The idea is that it is available in English for the moment, but we want to have it available in Arabic and French and Spanish later this year, so that it's accessible for as many users as possible. Do you continue to hear me well?
Yes, we hear you very well.
Yes? Okay, I was just checking.
Thank you. Thank you.
app, I put link for you to download it, and I would, you understood, encourage you to download this app in your smartphone. Now, let's dig into each of the standards. Let's speak about SPHERE. SPHERE Handbook is really a universal resource for those providing aid in humanitarian response. As I said before, in the SPHERE Handbook, there is the Humanitarian Charter, the Protection Principles, the core humanitarian standards for quality and accountability, and it has been used since it was first published in 1997. Humanitarian organizations have used it to provide assistance to millions of women, men, girls, and boys affected by humanitarian crises. And even numerous governments include the standards in their disaster law and policies and in their function as donors. So it was used for national disaster. It's used for national disaster management policy and guidelines. It really enjoys a broad ownership by NGOs and by UN agencies. And as we were saying before, it covers 4 life-saving areas: wash, food security and nutrition, shelter, settlement and non-food items, health action. It also includes cross-cutting issues such as gender, psychosocial support, HIV and AIDS, climate change, early recovery, and it's organized into those foundation chapters and then the technical chapters I mentioned. For each standard, and that's important to remember because you will see that it's the case for SPHERE, it's also the case for all the standards, the HSP standards, you would have standards, minimum standards, key action, key indicators, and guidance notes. So that's the full set of resource that an example, just to give an example, just to see, for you to see how it looks like in detail. For instance, if you take the standard on food security and the standard number 1 about food security and nutrition assessment. I don't know if it was already the case for you, but maybe sometimes you were working in programs in areas where people were at increased risk of food insecurity. So this is how it is presented. For instance, for this example, the standard says where people are at increased risk of food insecurity, assessments are conducted using accepted methods to understand the type, the degree, and extent of food insecurity, to identify those who are the most affected, and to define the most appropriate response. So this is the standard, but for you to fulfill the standard, you develop those key actions. So those are the key actions. The key action 1 is to use a methodology for your assessments which adheres to widely accepted principles and describe your methodology in your assessment report. So for instance, there is, together with the key action, you will have guidance notes, and the guidance notes will give you guidance and will let you know that for this methodology, it's important to define your scope, the scope of your assessment, your sampling procedures, even if it's informal, that you really have to define clearly the objective of your assessment, and that you have to get confirmation by different sources. For instance, crop assessments, household assessments, satellite images. So this is the way it is presented: standard, action, and guidance. Another key action for this standard is to analyze the impact of food insecurity on the population's nutritional status. because in the guidance relative to this action, it will remind you that food insecurity is just one underlying causes of undernutrition. Maybe there is undernutrition or malnutrition because of other factors. It reminds you to take this into account. And this key action, I wanted to stress it because it's very important, because you will see that it is the type of action that is repeated throughout the standard. And that's the case for the Sphere Handbook. That's also the case for all of the standards from the Humanitarian Standards Partnership. And this action is really to build on local capacities, including formal and informal institutions, wherever possible. This is a key point. It sounds obvious, but once you are designing your program, once you are in the middle of your action, it's good to be reminded of that, because there are so many resources locally for you to develop your work. So for instance, in this specific case, if you are working in an area that is subject to recurrent natural disasters or long-running conflicts, you may have local early warning mechanisms or emergency response systems that you can work with to design your response. The important is to engage with men and women locally to develop your response and engage with the beneficiaries of the response. So this was to give you an extract of the Sphere Handbook and to give you a bit of an introduction about it. It is available in more than 20 languages, and as you might know, it is currently being revised, and its fourth and updated edition will be released later this year, and it will include updated content so as to reflect most recent changes in the context and delivery of humanitarian response. For instance, it will take into account the increasing need to respond in urban areas. It will take into account the growing impact of climate change. It will increase leadership and support of local and national actors. And also, it will increase use of cash in place of in-kind assistance. Those are just examples. So it will be revised and launched. It is revised at the moment, and it will be launched later this year. So that was for the Sphere Handbook. Another standard that I presented earlier is called the Child Protection Minimum Standard. You know that child protection in emergencies is key. You can define it, as you can read it, as the prevention and the response to abuse, to neglect, to exploitation, and of violence against children in emergencies. We know that emergencies often have disastrous effects on children. It can result on injuries, they can become orphaned, they can become separated from their families, they can be recruited into armed forces or groups, they can be abused, they can get disabilities. So child protection work includes specific programs run by child protection specialists and actions integrated into all other humanitarian sectors. So the Child Protection Minimum Standard is led by the Child Protection Working Group, which is a global level forum of different agencies coordinating and collaborating on child protection in humanitarian settings. It was established in 2012, and it set out a common agreement on what needs to be achieved in order for child protection in emergency settings to be of adequate quality. The main objectives of the handbook are to improve the quality of child protection programming, to improve the accountability within child protection work, also to further define the professional field of child protection, and to enable better advocacy on child protection issues. So when you will read the standards, you will see how it is organized. It has 6 principles, 26 standards, and it will let you know, it will give you guidance on how to ensure quality in your child protection response, how to address child protection needs, how to develop adequate child protection strategies, and how to mainstream child protection in other humanitarian sectors. One thing to repeat again, but I will repeat that for all the standards, this is the result of broad consultations, hundreds of agencies that were involved in the design of this, and with very participatory mechanisms, and that's how the handbook was set. So just to give you an example, for instance, in the Child Protection Minimum Standard, there is a standard, Standard 19, that speaks about child protection and economic recovery. And this was used in specific context. I mean, child protection and economic recovery was used by IFRC in Lebanon, targeting for an action targeting youth living and working on the streets of Lebanon, people coming from Syria, and also Lebanese youth also living and working in those streets. The idea was to protect them as children, as young people. But there had to be an economic recovery component in this program, because most of the time, those young people were the breadwinners for the family. They had to make a living, and they had to sustain their families, and sometimes they were alone and they had to take care of their siblings. So it was impossible to protect them, to entice them to get an education if we could not give them some sense of economic stability. So this specific program used the Standard 19 on child protection and economic recovery, and made links with small enterprises, with the private sector locally, and employed the young people to give them a job, to give them a training, and so that they can get into the work culture, they can get a training, they could build a bit their knowledge, while their younger siblings could go to school and attend and get an education. So this is just to show you the concrete application of standards in one program. As for information, this standard, the Child Protection Minimum Standard, is available in many languages, including Arabic, and it's currently being revised. It will not be, actually, it says revision, but it's more an update, because the aim of the revision is really only changing what needs to be adapted. So it won't change, not everything will change. Only key issues will be strengthened, such as refugee context, urban settings, epidemic setting, family strengthening, and other aspects such as domestic or violence in general, or sector integrated approaches. So the revision is taking place at the moment, and the revision is a moment of dialogue, of exchange. So I would very much encourage you to participate into this revision, connect to the website, and contact, get in touch with the contacts to give your views on the standard, on the thing and the aspects that should be strengthened. That was for the Child Protection Minimum Standard. I'm now moving to the next standard, which is the INEE standard, the minimum standard for education. Now, with this standard, we are speaking about education. Again, at all stages of the response: preparedness, response, recovery. Education is a fundamental human right. It's critical for the tens of millions of young people, children affected by conflict and disasters, but it's often significantly disrupted in emergency situations, denying learners the transformative effects of quality education. But in emergency situations, though, quality education provides a sense of normality. It provides physical, psychosocial, and cognitive protection that can both sustain lives and save lives. So that is why the INEE, the Interagency Network for Education in Emergencies, developed in 2000 a minimum standard to enhance the quality of education, policy and programming, increase access to safe and relevant learning opportunities at the time of emergency. This network, INEE, was established in 2000 to improve the interagency communication and collaboration within the context of education in emergencies. So it's an open, a global network of NGOs, UN agencies, donors, practitioners, researchers, and individuals from affected populations, all working together around the theme of education in emergencies. So, this standard is available in 22 languages. It has been used in over 110 countries to strengthen education response. When you will read them, you will see that the standards are organized in 5 domains. And like the Sphere Handbook, you will see that there are organized in standards, key actions, guidance notes. The 5 domains are the foundational standards, as I was saying before, community participation, coordination analysis, then access and learning environment, teaching and learning, teachers and other education personnel, education policy. As an example of application, the INEE minimum standards were used by an important local organization in Pakistan to address the need of education for refugees from Afghanistan. It was deeply used, and more specifically, there is one guidance note under the chapter about teaching and learning that says that formal curricula and examinations used in the education of refugees or internally displaced people should be recognized by home and host governments. So that's why this structure who set up this education response collaborated with the Afghan Ministry of Education, both in Kabul and in Peshawar, and the Afghan consulate in Peshawar was able to issue certificates to all students studying in Pakistan. They really needed to have this certificate, and it's thanks to the standard that the structure, that the agency was able to make those links with the government to be able to provide the students with those certificates. This was just to give you one example of application. So That was a brief presentation of INEE, minimum standards for education. As you know, in the Humanitarian Standards Partnership, there are also other standards, and another one is LEGS. LEGS is for Livestock Emergency Guidelines and Standards. I just want to make a pause here and ask if you have any questions so far.
إذا كان لديكم أي أسئلة حتى الآن يرجى مشاركتنا إياها، أو الضغط على زر 0 إذا لا يوجد أسئلة، أو الضغط أو طرح السؤال. Well, I received one question on private.
Yes.
How we can contribute between the the child protection and INEE together? If there is a guide or best practice about it.
How we can contribute to the child protection revision, you mean?
Yeah.
Yes, I will share the link with you, Hamza, for you to send to the participants, so that they can get in touch with the coordination mechanism for the revision through the website, actually, that I will indicate at the end of the presentation. There's an easy access, but I will send you the exact link in this network for you to get directly to the page about the revision. And you will see when you will connect to the page that it will drive you. You will have the choice. You will choose the area, the thematic area where you specifically would like to contribute or to exchange. So as we were saying, revision processes are long, long in time. They involve many people. The revision of the child protection minimum standards was launched end of last year and will last until 2019. So there is a full amount of time to be involved, and that can be through workshops, that can be through online exchange. You will then choose the way that is best for you to participate in this revision.
Thank you very much. I have another question.
Yeah.
That when we work in the field, do we use the sphere standards and sphere evidence as long standards, and we could use it together with another standard?
So the question is how to use a sphere standard in conjunction with other standards, right?
Yeah.
On the field. That's exactly I could talk a bit about that now, but if you allow me, I will park this very important question for a bit later, because it's exactly the theme of the presentation, something we are going to discuss afterwards, to see the connections between the standards and how they can be used in conjunction. So if that's okay, I will just keep this important question for after.
Yes. سوف نقوم بالإجابة على هذا السؤال بعد قليل، لكن we have a third question, it's final questions.
Yeah.
Does the standards respect the traditional and the local culture or not?
It always says that the traditional and local culture is respected. It's always a mix. As I was saying, it's based on international laws and human rights laws, but then this needs to be adapted in context, and most of the time the standards are contextualized in specific countries. So you will see for the child protection minimum standard or for the INEE education standard that they are contextualized actually, and you will see how then they work in the context of custom law or traditional laws in specific context. There is always a sort of balance to find. But since the indication, the motto, the heart of these standards is to put people at the center of the response, and to respect and to defend their dignity. Of course, then it's really important. The most important thing is definitely to respect the culture and tradition, and that includes respect of traditional law and cultural law as well, when they do not conflict with international human rights.
Thank you very much. So we can now continue, and then there are another question we can repeat later.
Yes, yes. So another standard from the Humanitarian Standards Partnership is LEGS. LEGS is focusing on livestock. As you know, 1 billion people in the world depend on livestock for their livelihoods, and many of them are vulnerable to disasters. So protecting and rebuilding livestock assets can help to maintain and protect livelihoods for both the short and the long term. So the LEGS project grew out of concerns about repeated cycles of inappropriate and badly implemented livestock relief projects in emergencies, of weak coordination between development and emergency intervention. So LEGS draw on international framework on human rights, and more specifically on the right to food and the right to a standard of living. So the aim of LEGS is to support the saving of life and also the saving of livelihoods through two key strategies: assist in the identification of most appropriate livestock-related technical intervention in emergencies, and provide standards, indicators, and guidance notes for this intervention based on good practices. So it's really, the standards represent participatory processes to identify appropriate, timely, and feasible emergency intervention to help save livelihoods and to save lives. You will see that the standard is organized in 3 general chapters and 6 technical chapters. The 3 general chapters are the general principles, the decision making, the planning, and then you have 6 technical chapters about specific LEGS intervention: destocking, veterinary support, ensuring feed supplies, provision of water, livestock shelter and settlement, provision of livestock. So the handbook is available in Arabic as PDF form from the website. It's available in 7 other languages: Spanish, Thai, Vietnamese, Mongolian, English, French. And there is a very large network of trainers around the world. There are about 500 trainers. And so far, they have carried out more than 280 training in over 50 countries. So you can very well get in touch with the trainer or the training structures in your neighboring, in your area, and assist to one of the LEGS training. That was for livestock. Then there is also the minimum economic recovery standard. Now everyone knows that during the time of emergency, the economy continued to function. It continued during a crisis, albeit at a reduced or shrinking rate of growth. Affected populations require a source of income at a minimum to survive and at best to thrive once again. At earlier stages, some years ago, it was not there was an understanding of that, but we had the impression that economic recovery was rather a later stage activity. Now we understand that actually economic recovery should happen during the crisis, and there are different crises that showed that this was necessary. For instance, the 2004 Indian Ocean tsunami, the conflicts in South Asia and Middle East, and the earthquake in Haiti in 2010, all that showed that economic recovery is key. So the minimum economic recovery standards were sponsored by the CEP network. The CEP network is dedicated to combating poverty through promoting inclusive markets and financial systems. So it engages organizations to collectively tackle the challenge of poverty, of inequality, of food security, and impact of natural disasters and conflict. So, as sphere guideline or common standards, they do not address economic recovery programming. And that is why the MERS were developed, to address this gap. And somehow this answers somehow the question that was asked a bit earlier: how do standards connect each other? How on the field do I apply sphere and other standards? Actually, economic recovery is a complementary component of sphere, so that is where you can go to sphere and go to certain aspects of MERS that will be useful maybe for your programming. You see the connectivity between the two. And the MERS were developed really in conjunction with the sphere, really in the same structure, again, with standards, with key actions, with guidance notes, and with indicators. It was developed in 2009, but it has been revised twice since. And the third and new edition was released, that you can see here, was released last year. It represents a consensus across agencies engaged in economic recovery and development on what constitutes an effective and appropriate response to help the disaster-affected population to gain fair access to viable economic opportunities, to regain their livelihoods, and provide for themselves and their families with dignity. So the last new edition is for the moment only available in English, but it will soon be translated in different languages: French, Spanish, and Arabic. When you will read it, you will see that the standards highlight strategies to promote financial services, productive assets, employment, and enterprise development among livelihoods in areas affected by conflict and disaster. Those are the categories: core standard, assessment and analysis, financial services, employment creation, enterprise development. And for each of the categories, you will have, as I was saying, the standards, the action, the indicators, and the guidance notes. So the handbook was designed to address the issue of economic recovery. And then the last one in the partnership is the MISMA. The MISMA deals about cash transfer and market analysis. As you know, cash transfer programming has emerged in the recent years as one significant innovation in humanitarian response. When it's appropriately incorporated into humanitarian response planning, that includes access to goods or services, cash transfer programming can present opportunities for programming to meet the needs of people and communities affected by crisis. But, very important, market analysis must really be an integral and essential step in any program response involving any sector. So whether we work in food security or livelihoods or public health, there is always the need to understand, to analyze the market, and that means understand the local labor market, to understand the debt constraints, the credit market, the political economy, the supply and demand elasticity. That is really a need, and this is what the standard is promoting. This standard is really meant to be used in conjunction with the other standards. That also to respond to the earlier question on the connectivity between the standards. This is a supplementary tool to be used together with SPHERE or with CPMS or the other standards that you are using. It is designed and led by CALP. CALP is the Cash Learning Partnership. It's a big global community of practice in cash transfer programming, and it built the MISMA, Minimum Standards for Market Analysis. It was developed in 2013 to guide the work of humanitarian practitioners across sector and to support high quality market analysis. So it was really built on the principle that market analysis should aim to trigger a wide range of programming options using and supporting the market. At the very least, market analysis should prevent responses from causing harm to local markets and to market actors. And again, the MISMA, the Minimum Standards for Market Analysis, mirrors the fact that really place affected communities at the heart of market analysis. So it's not only about analyzing the market, it's about understanding how communities access and interact with these markets. So in detail, in the handbook, you will see that there are 5 key actions that are covered. First, definition of the scope. When you do the market analysis, we identify the scope, the analytical and geographical scope of our assessment. Then we build a team, a competent and knowledgeable team for data collection and analysis. Then we do the data collection and we use methods and information sources of sufficient quality use. Then we do the analysis, the market analysis to adequately inform program design and achieve program objectives. And then market monitoring to review the assessment finding and enable the adaptation of the assessment and the program, the adaptation of the program when needed. So it's one standard, 5 key actions, and again, key indicators and guidance notes. The MISMA is really a market-specific standard. It does not comprehensively cover response analysis. It should therefore, once again, be used in conjunction to other humanitarian standards. So, how does the partnership, the Humanitarian Standard Partnership, make a difference for all these standards? It brings more coherence. When you will read the standards, you will see that there is no repetition. It's only complementary. There should not be any redundancy. And there are more cross-references. So if you read the SPHERE handbook, you will see the reference to the other handbooks wherever relevant. So it's easier for you, for us all to navigate between the handbooks. The partnership also organize advocacy activities on humanitarian standards and organize trainings, outreach activities like this one, just for humanitarians to know that they can use multiple sets of standards, that they have these tools available at disposal for them when they need them. And it's really meant, the partnership is really meant to ensure that crucial linkages are made at the outset of an emergency. Most of the time, we need to do multi-sector needs assessment. We need to do joint planning. We need to set up a holistic response. That means that we have to involve different sectors. So through the partnership, we have access to the variety of standards and each of them is specialized in one specific area, and we can cover them all. The overall purpose of the partnership is to increase the quality and the effectiveness of humanitarian action and for us to be held accountable to the affected population. So, is there a question before I move to the case study in Zaatari camp?
يمكن طرح الأسئلة لو بتحبوا عن طريق المايك أو عن طريق الكتابة بالشات، فأي واحد أفضل لكم ممكن أن أفتح المايك لو بتحبوا. We have one question from Zainab. How can sphere standards go through the local standards, their own standards, if there's a conflict situations regarding to hosting community standards?
Do you want to respond to this one, Hamza, or shall I respond as you prefer?
Yes, you can go ahead if you want.
Okay, so the question is how sphere standards interact with the local standards in a crisis situation.
Yeah.
In the time of conflicts. Most of the time, I would say most of the time, there is no contradiction between the local standard and the international standard and the sphere standards, because when you look at the contextualization of the sphere standards, you will see that they are meant to be, I don't really like the word universal, but you see what I mean. They should be universally applicable to every situation. So they are geared to be adapted to the local situation and also to the local standards. So to ensure actually that both the set of the sphere standards and local standards are really working, that that there is a harmony between the standards, it's advisable to have a sort of a bottom-up approach. First, ask the affected population what are the needs, what is their aim, and then they will explain, people will explain their understanding of their situation. The communities will explain their interpretation and how they see the situation, and they will base that most probably on local standards. But then it's easy to see that there is a link between local standards and sphere standard, because an international standard, because then there is a wider community that is agreeing on the application of this standard. There is always a wider community, international community, that is backing up this, because the local standards are saying, protect my rights, give me justice, defend my dignity, and the international standards are saying the same. So I would say that the sphere standards are really making the links between local standards and international standards.
Thank you. لو كان في عندكم أي سؤال كمان ممكن تطرحوه عن طريق المايك أو الكتابة على الشات. لو ما في عندكم سؤال مجرد تكتبوا صفر على الشات. مشكور لكم.
Also, just to complement that, sometimes standards need to be adapted, and adapted with good sense. When humanitarian practitioners, frontline workers, agencies go through them, they see that it's not about just applying the standard the way it's written, but really making it work in the context. So sometimes in the context, you cannot apply the standard exactly the way it is applied, because you have to respect the specificities of this context. But that's really fine, and that's the way it should work. That's why I was saying that community participation into the design of the humanitarian program is key, because people will know best what is good for them and the way they can implement those norms and those standards. So I wanted to talk to you about a case study that the Humanitarian Standards Partnership has commanded in the Zaatari camp. it was a short-term research that there was an opportunity to do the research, and the research aimed to explore the use and the complementarity of humanitarian standards in specific contexts. And the question was where to really do the research, in which location. Actually, two locations were selected. One was Nepal, and more specifically, the Nepal response, the response of the earthquake in Nepal. And the second one was the Zaatari camp. The reason was that it was important and interesting to look at cases that are different from one another. In the Nepal response earthquake, it was a natural disaster. In the case of Zaatari camp, it's a totally different aspect. It's the result of conflicts and crisis. And it's also an evolution because it has moved from a humanitarian emergency resulting from the civil conflict in Syria, and it has now evolved into a protracted crisis. So it was interesting to see how standards can be applied in the context of such protracted crisis. So the methodology for the research was both a desktop research and second also interview of humanitarian actors and mostly international aid workers. The people interviewed were primarily international aid workers involved in different aspects of the refugee response in the first years. They were working from different sectors, they had different staff level, and some were only focused on the Zaatari camp, and some others were also involved in the larger Jordan refugee response. And the question that was asked to them was how they use and how they perceive the humanitarian standards that we just talked about. They gave us a sort of reminder, quick reminder about the camp. It opened in 2012 in response to the massive refugee outflows from Syria. And the last figure from November 2017 is saying that about 80,000 people are living in the camp, and 20% of these people are children under 5 years old. And as you know, the main activity in the camp are organized under UNHCR camp coordination structure with different working groups. One is basic needs and livelihoods, health, education, community mobilization, WASH, protection, and security. And there are about 45, maybe 50, something in between organizations currently present in the camp. So when we did the investigation and asked to people look at the literature about the perception and knowledge of standards, most of the time the result was that there is a good perception of humanitarian standards, there is some knowledge, but there is still a gap in knowledge for cross-sectoral humanitarian standards. So people know sphere, workers, practitioners know CPMS, for instance, but they will not necessarily know that there are also other standards available and make the link. And there was also into that still a difference between local NGOs and international NGOs in terms of knowledge. And that's a gap that should really be addressed. In terms of application, in the Zaatari camp, practitioners and agencies use standards to design their program and to implement their program. And they also use the standards to develop their own internal standards, and that's definitely the case for international NGOs. They develop their own internal standards based on sphere, based on CPMS. And they are saying that for them, standards are not checklists, you know, where you have to tick boxes, but there are more framework used for dialogue between agencies. They were also saying that actually the use of the standards depends on the stage of humanitarian response. At the early days, standards were key. especially when everything had to be built from scratch. They really used a lot, namely the sphere standard. But they had the impression that, I'm telling their views now and the feedback, that now the situation has shifted from emergency to development, so they use less standards. And this is a bit contrary to what we were saying earlier, because actually they have standards available that they can use even now, and that also more adaptable to development situation or protracted crisis. But I'm telling you their interpretation and their vision of standards. What's important is that people living in the camp don't know about the standards, and that's an important gap, because normally the standards, humanitarian standards, are meant to be known by the people benefiting from the assistance, because they should be able to use them to know about their rights and to be able to claim their rights to humanitarian practitioners, to duty bearers, to policymakers, and to say and to explain that they are entitled to this right or to this facility. Of course, in practice, it's always difficult. When you live in a camp, you are already dealing with a different set of situation. Maybe you don't feel empowered enough to claim your right or to complain, but in normally you should be able to do that, and that's what standards should be about, at least so that they know what they are entitled to. But for those who used the standard, in Zaatari, they were using most of the time sphere, and they were saying that sphere is an overarching framework, and the other standards are technical standards to supplement sphere in specific sector. So, for instance, if you work in psychosocial support activities for children, I'm not talking about education, but just really talking about psychosocial support for children, certain who have fled from their homes, certain who were born in the camp and do not have necessarily the knowledge of Syria, but they are living in the camp, and they are living with their families, and they are under a situation of stress because their families are under stress. They need this support, and if you are engaged into such activities, then you can very well use sphere, but you can also use CPMS, as there are specific sections that will guide you into the development of activity related to psychosocial support. If you are involved in a program on cash-based assistance, knowing that in the Zaatari camp, it started for food, for instance, it started with hot meal distribution, and then there were cooking facilities, and then there were paper vouchers, and now there is possibility of cash transfer. So given that, FEAR, MERS, the Minimum Economic Recovery Standard, and CALP, which is more specifically MISMA, the Minimum Standard for Market Analysis, are tools to use in conjunction to look at your program on cash-based assistance. You will indeed need to do market analysis. In the case of Jordan, you know that if you implement a cash-based program, it will not normally create too much of a market distortion compared to other contexts, but still, it creates a market distortion. So you want to be sure that you are not causing more harm and that you are developing an assistance that is available for as many persons as possible. That's what FEAR is saying. That's also what the Humanitarian Inclusion Standard is saying, and other standards are saying. Be as inclusive as possible. So those are tools for you to use when developing this. The development of cash-based in this case was really to support and to defend the dignity of affected population. The notion of dignity is very important in humanitarian standards and on standards of Humanitarian Standards Partnership. I get more empowered if I can just decide on how I spend money and what I buy rather than going into distribution center. So that's how the cash-based program, cash-based assistance program were developed. And the standards are at heart of these programs. The same for food program. When supermarkets in the camp are equipped for wheelchairs, it responds, it echoes with the humanitarian inclusion standard. This is a standard that I have not talked about into my presentation. It was presented by it has been launched by ADCAP. It's not part of this partnership. Maybe it will be part later. Of course, the partnership is in constant evolution, and there can be definitely standards that are joining throughout the years. And if you are involved into educational program, then you can use SPHERE, but you can also use INEE, the minimum standards on education, and you can also use CPMS, child protection minimum standards, if you are working with a younger population. That was the case for one program that targeted young people who in the camp who did not have so many opportunity in terms of higher education, which resulted in a lack of motivation and more child labor. So they decided to set up partnerships with university in Jordan, the Yarmouk University, and many young people could attend to training and to courses in program management, in information technology management, and in social work diploma. Again, the INEE standards are really key for this type of program and for the child protection and for the educational programs in general. So those are cases, illustrations of use of standards in a specific context in Zaatari. And then, as a sort of conclusion for that, the one specificity of the camp is that because actually there are so many sectors operating side by side, because of the nature of the camp, actually there is more opportunity to increase the use of multiple standards concretely and complementary. To tell you, the researchers who did this research were even saying that actually the Zaatari camp could even become a model for other camps all throughout the world, because there is really an opportunity, a big room, a possibility to use each of these standards for the different programs and the different actions. The SPHERE, LEGS, MISMA, Child Protection, MERS, and INEE. So to finish on this presentation, Hamza invited me to present to you a case study that I can present to you now, something that you can do after this training, a proposal for you to be able to take as much as possible from this training. And the proposal is that you read SPHERE, if in case it was not done already, and one other HSP handbook, the one that is the most relevant to your work, to your activity, or to your interest. And from this reading, you can identify about 5 standards that you would be able to use either for your program design, or for training staff, or for monitoring your program or your activity, or that you would like or you would be able to use for advocacy or any other purpose that you identify. And it would be good if you could present these standards and explain how they can work in your specific context. So this is something that we can discuss. This is a proposal of work to continue to prolong the information from this training, and for you to get to know the standards, and maybe the one that you didn't know or didn't know well, or have not had the time to read until now. In any case, I really hope that this presentation gave you the willingness and the envy to read more about the standards. you can really go into each of these websites and download the standards there. And of course, Hamza and I remain available for any question you may have.
Thank you for this powerful presentation. It was very useful information that you provide. We have several questions. أرجاء إذا كان لديكم أي أسئلة طرحوها عن طريق الشات أو يمكن أفتح لكم المايك لو كنتم بحاجة إلى ذلك وتواجهون صعوبات الكتابة. عرضنا بالمختصر ما هي المعايير المرافقة للسفير وكيف تحولت إلى شراكة حقيقية وسميت شراكة المعايير الإنسانية. تحدثنا كيف تطور كل دليل وطرحنا بعض الأمثلة من خلال هذه الأدلة وكيف أن جميع الأنشطة أو التي نقوم بها ونقدمها أثناء استجابتنا الإنسانية هي مرتبطة مع بعضها البعض. جميع هذه الأدلة طرحنا مثال عن مخيم الزعتري وكيف يمكن أن نقوم في الدعم النفسي الاجتماعي وأن نستخدم معايير السفير ومعايير حماية الطفل ومعايير التعليم مع بعضها البعض. وإذا كان لديكم أي أسئلة يمكن طرحها. We have one question from Jamal. He asked how we can make sure that sphere standards are going to be used by the international NGOs or even by the local NGOs, and if there's any application for that or any tools that we can make sure that our work is presented well.
There are always tools that the local NGOs or the international NGOs can use to self-assess whether they have fulfilled the sphere standards. But these are not mandatory tools. If you compare to other standards in other sectors, in other sectors you would have standards and then a certification process, you would have audits. It is not exactly the way the sphere standards work. It can be the way, but it's up to the organization to decide whether they want to go through this type of assessment, these assurance mechanisms, these audit mechanisms to check whether the standards were achieved. The reason why it was not set as mandatory is because there is a general recognition that the standards are guidelines, but sometimes you are in such situations that you cannot fulfill the standards, and it's not the fault of the organization, it's because the context does not allow you to provide with the minimum, for instance, amount of water that is needed per person or the amount of sanitation facilities that is needed. Sometimes it's just not possible because of external factors, and it can be unfair to say that the local NGO or the international NGO has not done the job. Nonetheless, the NGO, the organization, needs to explain why they were not able to fulfill the standard and to establish a plan on how they will fulfill the standard.
شكرا لك جلال على طرح هذا السؤال المهم جدا. أود أن أضيف إلى ما قالته زميلتي أن هذه المعايير جميعها هي معايير طوعية ليست ملزمة بحد ذاتها، ولدينا الكثير من الأدوات للطرحاء إما السفير أو شركاء السفير لتقييم عملنا هل هو محقق إلى هذه المعايير أم لا. على سبيل المثال طرح دليل السفير مجموعة من الأدلة الصغيرة التي تشير إلى السفير والتقييم، السفير والمراقبة. هي مجموعة من الأدلة. كمان هناك أدلة للتقييم الذاتي للطروحات CPMS، وهي أدلة التقييم الذاتي يمكن أن أشارككم إياها في عبر الإيميل إن كان هذا مهم. هل لديكم أي سؤال آخر فيما يخص جلستنا اليوم؟ أود أن أذكركم في جلسات التي سوف تقام، وهي عبارة عن 5 جلسات. باشرنا في الجلستين الأولتين. الجلسة الأولى كانت عن أهمية السفير ومقدمة عنه وعن الميثاق الإنساني ومبادئ الحماية والCPMS. أيضا حكينا في الجلسة الثانية عن أهمية النظرة العامة إلى المعايير الشريكة للمعايير للسفير، شركاء المعايير الإنسانية. سوف نتحدث في الجلسة الثالثة عن الوش والفود سيكيورتي. نتحدث في الجلسة الرابعة عن الشلتر ومقدمة عن كلب في التطبيق العملي. وسنتحدث في الجلسة الأخيرة عن معايير الصحة المعايير الخاصة بكبار السن وذوي الاحتياجات الخاصة. دورتنا هذه دورة تفاعلية ويمكن أن تعديل الأجندة حسب متطلباتكم. فعلى سبيل المثال إذا كنتم بحاجة أن نتوسع في ليكس فممكن نتوسع فيه في الجلسة القادمة، ولأنه هو مرتبط في الفود سيكوريتي على سبيل المثال. فالتقييمات التي تأتينا منكم هي أدلة ممكن نغير الأجندة من خلالها. الرجاء عدم التردد في طرح أي سؤال أو اقتراح من قبلكم. الجلسات للتأكد من جودة الجلسة ووصول المعلومات إليكم نقوم مثل بعمل تقييمات بسيطة لكم. هذه التقييمات سوف تأخذون عليها نقاط، مجموعة من النقاط، وسوف تؤهلكم إلى الحصول على الشهادة في آخر الويبينار، في آخر الجلسات. We have several questions if you can open your chat. What is the difference between core standards and sphere standards?
The core humanitarian standards are part of the sphere standards. If I go back to this diagram, you would see that the core humanitarian standards for quality and accountability, that is the full name, are really integral part of the sphere standards. They are really representing the quality tool for a quality humanitarian response, and they are actually really part and parcel of the sphere standards. And as I was telling you that the revision, the sphere standard is revised at the moment, and the new version of the handbook is going to be available later this year, there will be still an integration of the core humanitarian standards on quality and accountability as really the essential elements for accountable, effective, and high-quality humanitarian action. So I would say that these are really one of the essential bases of the sphere standards. They're no different, they are complementary. So the sphere standards have the core humanitarian standards for quality and accountability as basis, together with the humanitarian charter, the protection principles, and then on top of that, it goes into the minimum technical standards for each sector and intervention.
We have another question from Zainab, and she would like to hear from your side about if there any relation between the sphere standards and the SDG standards goals, and how we can relate between them.
That's also a good question. The sphere standard can be seen as one tool to achieve the SDGs. If you look at the SDGs, they say no poverty, no hunger, good wealth and well-being. So, for instance, no poverty is what sphere is trying to address through the standards, explains what to do to alleviate poverty and to alleviate human suffering. One of the other SDGs is zero hunger. So with the food and nutrition chapter, this is what the sphere is addressing one aspect of this sustainable development goal. The same for health. And another SDG is about health, about well-being. Health is addressed by sphere. I think one SDG is also about quality, good education, and sphere, together with INEE, addresses that. INEE being the minimum standard for education. And in the sphere handbook, there are also other cross-cutting themes that are consistent with the SDGs, like gender equality or things related to climate change, the fact that people should have access to an affordable energy, to clean energy, is something that is addressed by sphere, and something that is going to be addressed even in a stronger way in the next version, taking into account the impact of climate change. So it will work into addressing a bit more the sustainable development goals as they were developed by the United Nations. I think there is also one SDG related to population living in urban area, which is the majority of the population in the world. And again, SPHERE already addresses that to target population living in urban settings at times of emergencies, but this is an area that is going to be strengthened in the next edition of the standard. For the other SDGs, I wouldn't say that SPHERE addresses or is a tool that uses that addresses all of the Sustainable Development Goals, but most of them. And when SPHERE does not address them specifically, then the partners standards do that. So that's the case for education, and that's the case also for everything that is related to employment and to sustainable growth. Together with MISMA, with MERS, SPHERE addresses the idea that all people should enjoy normal, decent growth and have a sustainable livelihood. So I see a lot of consistency between the SPHERE standards and the SDGs, as SPHERE standards being a tool to achieve the SDGs.
Yes, thank you very much. We have another question. They're asking about the Humanitarian Standard Partnership application, if it's free and if it includes best practice and case studies too.
Yes, it's free. The criteria to be member of this partnership, as you saw, I want to show again the diagram with all the standards. This is a partnership with standard setting initiatives like SPHERE. Behind these standards in setting initiatives, there are networks, and these and the standards should come out of a transparent and consultative process. They should have guidance indicators. They should have standards and key action. They should be structured a bit like SPHERE for consistency, and they should really aim to improve the quality of humanitarian action. Another criteria for entering the partnership is to bring something additional to these standards. So if there is an area that is covered by another standard, similar standard like that, but that is additional and complementary to livestock, to everything that is in SPHERE, to child protection, then it can work and it can enter into the partnership. Another criteria, so that's important, and you understand that if you take the perspective of users, standard users don't want to see standards that are redundant, that are repetitive. They want to see standards that are complementary and that they can really use in their work, that are practical and easy to use, and that are driven by consensus and by best practice and learnings. And the way it works, the partnership, just to let you know, is that each of the standard initiative has a representative into the partnership, and they meet on a regular basis, and they agree on certain action, on planning, and they develop joint activity. They remain separate entities from one another, but they agree on a yearly basis on activities and actions to increase the use of standards and to improve the user experience, to be as coherent, as cross-referenced as much as possible. And to your question, they include case studies. By essence, each of the standards, they have case studies within their handbook and sometimes on their website, and they are the results of learning and of best practices. So on those websites, you will see the latest case studies that were developed for each of the standards. Sometimes those are case studies just for one standard. Sometimes these are case studies for a different set of standards used together. The purpose is that these case studies, these learnings, are used as inspiration by other practitioners for them to design their work.
Thank you very much for this question. Actually, we have several questions we can talk more for because it has the time.
Okay.
Yes. The first question is how we can, as local NGOs, involve with this initiative, how we can upload our best practice to this application, and if there's an focal point speaker.
Yes, there is. For each of the standard initiative, there is a focal point. Sphere has focal points, legs as well. So depending on the countries that you are interested in, you can let me know and I can find you the focal point for the standard you are interested in.
Mm-hmm. And how we can upload our best practice and be involved as local NGOs with this application?
I think either through this best practice, you can relay them to the focal points, you can relay it to the contacts you will see in the website, you can relay them to me as well, and we can see how this can be used, and also how, because this is really important knowledge that each standard initiative is interested to get, so it's definitely welcome. And I wanted to say that at the times of revision, again, and I was saying Sphere is currently revised, CPMS is currently revised. At the times of revision, it's really the moment to send this experience and this knowledge and this best practice, because then that can also trigger reflection and input for the standards. The standards, the way they are written, they are not moving until the next revision. Of course, in the meantime, you can send a bit of some of your feedback and best practice. It's really, really needed. But I would say really be involved into the revision so that you can also share those best practices. It would be great to receive them. If you want to send them to me or to Hamza, to the focal point, I will send you the contact of.
Absolutely, you are most welcome. You can connect us anytime you want. Zainab have question. If I can open the mic and you can explain your question more, I will open the mic. Zainab, as she asking about the climate change and how it's related with Sphere standards.
About which change?
Climate change.
Yes.
Climate change and how it's related with Sphere standards and the crossing issue.
So it is
water
related
and food. Yeah.
Yeah, it is related in the sense that it has more and more impact on the livelihood and on the life of people. It is now sure that the number of refugees because of climate change has drastically increased in the past years, and there are going to be more and more people that will be forced to leave their homes because of the impact of climate change. So that can be just because of catastrophes like natural disasters happening because of the effect of climate change, that's immediate, and then they become refugees and they need assistance. But that can be also in the long run because, for instance, if they are farmers and they are growing coffee in one area, then the coffee doesn't grow anymore because of climate change. Then all the pattern of the ecology is changing. There is too much drought or too much rain, then or too much disease or too much pests, and in the end they cannot grow this culture anymore, and they are forced to leave their villages or their places and move to somewhere else and find a living. So the mobility, the amount of people forced to leave is increasing as well. So the impact of climate change has to be taken into account because it will really have impact on humanitarian crises. And that's why Sphere already takes it into account into the design of the standard, but it will take it more and more into account because humanitarian practitioners need guidance on how to address these issues, how to prevent, how to strengthen population resilience towards climate change, and how to help them adapt to the effects of climate change.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Thank you very much. We'll have a last question for today. Jalal has asked, what's the tolerance of change of use of these standards and how we can, if it's possible to change it to use it in our context, local context, or shouldn't change at all?
It's not meant the way it's written. but it's meant to be contextualized again. So if you go to the website, you will see that there are resources and there are examples of how, for instance, the INEE, the minimum standards for education, was recently, not recently, was contextualized for the context of Jordan, and you will see how the standards were seen to be applied in the specific context of Jordan, for instance. So this can be a basis for your work. You can see if that can work also in your context, because there's already some work done and how on to adapting the standard to the contextual reality.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much for this complete answer, I think. I would welcome you again. أود أن أشكركم جميعا على تواجدكم في هذه الجلسة المهمة التي قدمتها زميلة شندا. من المهم جدا أن نتعرف على المعايير المرافقة لدليل سفير وما أهميتها ومتى تطبيقها في أرض الواقع، وهل هي قابلة للتطبيق أم لا. أخذنا رؤية عامة عن هذه المعايير ويمكن أن نتوسع فيها ضمن جلساتنا الثلاث القادمة إن أردتم ذلك. سوف أطلب منكم عدة أمور أرجو الالتزام بها. أولا الحضور في الوقت المناسب لهذه الجلسة لكي لا نتأخر عن أي مشكلة تقنية. الأمر الثاني هي تقييم المحاضرة التي نلقيها من خلال presentation العرض أو وصول المعلومات إليكم لكي نتداركها في الجلسة التي بعدها. أشكر جميع الأشخاص الذين قاموا في التقييم المحاضرة الأولى إن كانوا حضروا أو لم يحضروا لسبب تقني. وأشكر الأشخاص الذين أتموا المهمة الأولى للتدريب. مثل ما قلت لكم أن المهام سوف تجمع في آخر التدريب. يجب عليكم لكي نتأكد من جديد التدريب أن تقوموا في حل جميع المهام. جلستنا القادمة سوف تكون في 21 الشهر الساعة 11 بتوقيت الأردن أيضا. بناء على تقييمكم ممكن أن نقوم في التعديل على الجلسة بناء على احتياجكم أنتم. سوف أرسل لكم عبر الإيميل المهمة الثانية للمحاضرة الثانية التي تكلمت عنها زميلتي، وسوف تكون بالعربية والإنجليزية. هذا متاح إليكم أيضا. أود أن أشكركم جميعا وأشكر تواجدكم. Thank you very much for attending today, and thank you for it also for giving the opportunity to speak today.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you so much for your attention and for this organization.
Mm-hmm. If we have any question, we can repeat at it by now.
Yeah.
Yes, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.